Okay, welcome back to another edition, another episode of Rotten Reviews. Today I'm going to be taking a look at 2007's 30 Days of Night, a vampire horror movie that has a 51% on the tomato meter and a 56% on the audience score. It is considered rotten, although it appears to be just barely rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. This was a comic book story that was adapted into a movie. Um, it portrays vampires in a horrific and gory way. It certainly does not make them out to be the nice, sparkly vampires of Twilight. It's attempting to do the exact opposite. It has a catchy premise that, the regions of Alaska which experience long stretches of daylight and conversely nighttime, the nighttime parts would make the perfect hunting ground for vampires, or even a nice vacation spot for vampires where they can feast on a small town in northern Alaska. The premise is kind of interesting. It's exciting. I was certainly interested in it when this movie was coming out. I didn't see it in the theater. I saw it on home video release, DVD. I found it acceptable. I found it refreshingly vindictive and gory. But again, it divided people. It divided horror fans. Some people criticize this because it takes place in a 30 days stretch of time, like the title suggests, and yet it feels very compressed. We don't really get that sense of the passage of time. On the other hand, fans of the dark comic appreciate that it follows along very nicely. It's a very faithful adaptation of the comic. This was certainly a very commercially successful film. It made quite a profit considering its budget, and it also spawned a forgettable and bad sequel, but it also, more importantly, spawned several comics and novels that went on to become successful. So overall, this was a commercial success, and yet it's largely seen as a forgotten and, I don't know, quite divisive failure amongst horror fans. We're going to look at that, but first let me show you the 2010 lower budget sequel that was inspired by this movie, 30 Days of Night, Dark Days. I would not recommend this. I've never seen it. I haven't heard anything about it, but this looks like something that might have gone straight to the video bargain bin. Certainly something that might have appeared on the Sci-Fi Channel late at night, once upon a time. I seriously doubt even that, though, because I had never heard of this before today when I looked at this film. It's got a quite rotten score. How could you expect any less? So let's leave this behind and move on to the audience reviews. I want to see how this movie aged. I want to see if it's still as divisive amongst horror fans, and I want to see if anybody else read something into this that I didn't read into it. Personally, it fell a little flat to me. I don't remember a large stretch of the movie in the middle parts. I do remember the ending. That, again, is faithful to the comic book from what I know. I consider the premise to be exciting, the ending to be good, but the execution, something about it fell flat to me, and I think the reason for me is that the horror tension it peaks out too early in the film. It peaks way too soon, like maybe halfway through, so that doesn't leave us that, that climax that we're expecting towards the end of a film, and that's why it seems to fall flat. We'll see what other people think, so let's move right into the audience reviews. Here we have recent reviews from October of 2019, 5 stars. The rating of this film proves that Rotten Tomatoes is not a legitimate review site. This is one of the best vampire films, offers a few thrills, succumbs to erratic execution, pretentious morons. I think they're referring more to the critics' reviews. That's something the critics might say. Let's move on. 3 stars. Humanism versus animalism in this violently overdone picture with an advantageous setting of surprising time span, and managed to still be thrilling if not appalled by the erratic execution. That's a lot of wordiness to say that, it was so-so. I kind of agree. If I had to give it a star rating, I would say 2.5 stars because it wasn't memorable enough to me to be 3 stars. Again, I think it peaked too soon. It should have drawn it out further. It had a good setup, but it didn't give us enough suspense. Like it jumped into the all-out vampire carnage, revealing the big bad villain and etc. too early. That's my opinion, but let's move on. 3 stars. It is very dark and suspenseful. I'm not a Josh Hartnett fan, but he is a decent in this film. The build-up is worth the payout. It doesn't feel like a 2-hour movie to me. I rarely say I wish a 2-hour movie was longer, but I felt like they could have shown me more of the cat and mouse aspect. It would have been nice to see the daily experience of the survivors hiding out. If you're a horror movie fan, then you will enjoy this. I think I largely agree. They're saying along the lines of what I am, that there could have been more suspense. It peaked too soon. I think they revealed the actual big bad villain too soon. I think the villain did a great job. I think the actor did a great job. I just think he was revealed too soon. There should have been more of a mystery to it. 4 stars, a very underrated film and definitely one of my favorite vampire movies of all time. It's funny when people complain about the Twilight movies on how vampires are poorly represented, and yet with a movie like 30 Days of Night, where vampires are at their true horrific peak, it still doesn't satisfy them. Well, I was satisfied. Yeah, there's this division between people that want vampires to be incredibly gory and scary and over-the-top violent, and then the other people that want to see vampires portrayed in a different way, not necessarily like they are in Twilight, but they expect to see something new each time. They consider these type of vampires in this movie to be cliched. It's a division within the vampire fandom, so to speak, and not just picking on Twilight, but anytime a film attempts to have their particular type of vampire, there are fans that gravitate to that and they want this particular new take on vampires, but there are the purists that want to see vampires the way they're supposed to be, the traditional way. These aren't your friends. These aren't emo teenagers. These aren't, hot girls that you want to be in love with. These are savage animals of the worst predatory type. And that's what a lot of vampire fans want. And there's this big division with this movie. I've seen this division in this movie more than any other. People bag on Twilight, but you see the people bagging on it right away. There isn't really a division amongst the fans. In this one, there's quite a division amongst people that actually like the movie as to what kind of vampires they prefer. 5 stars. This is easily one of my favorite monster movies of all time. Not sure why it has bad reviews at all. This movie is the best. I disagree. They kind of peaked too soon. Didn't have enough suspense for the ending. 5 stars. One of the best all-time movies about vampires that I have seen, hands down. Original, scary, fast-paced, and great. Great story. I wouldn't say, I say the fast-paced might be working against it. Again, this is 30 Days of Night, but in this 2-hour movie, it doesn't feel like 30 days. 4 stars, a clever vampire horror film ever. 3 stars, I like how the movie just sticks to a simple story that flows evenly throughout the film. No crazy new takes on vampires, just the regular stuff like sun and headshots kill them. Half a star, 1 out of 10. 100 minutes of nothing. You can't tell with that review which type of vampire they were looking for, but obviously they didn't find it in this movie. 3 stars, not scary unless you're afraid of vampires. The plot is very good, but for some reason the final product falls short of that. Nothing wrong with the acting. Josh Hartnett leads the way. Overall, it's a good film that could have been a lot more. This reviewer seems to say that he wanted to see something new with the vampires, that traditional vampires don't scare him. Okay, but again, that he's up against a lot of competing voices. 3 stars. An interesting new take on the vampire genre. While it is not a perfect movie, it is entertaining nonetheless, taking vampires in a more terrifying direction. Instead of being stalked by a Dracula type, being these vampires are more monstrous and brutal. Danny Huston, as the lead monster, does a good job becoming a beast. We are used to elegant vampires that are articulate and almost kingly. These blend the Nosferatu style with a blade. The characters are just one note, and okay, I kind of agree with this. They're saying that They want to see vampires that are brutal, like they're supposed to be. They like the villain, the actor that played him. But they don't agree on the characterization. They're saying the characters are like uncharacterized. I'll kind of agree on that. It goes along with the pace where this doesn't feel like 30 days. And in a movie that takes place over 30 days, you would think you would get to know the characters a lot better. Yeah. So 5 stars. This movie was really good and it was pretty well directed. Okay. Disagree. 5 stars. I disagree. 3.5 stars. 30 Days of Night has its fair share of flaws and cliches, but compared to Twilight, it's a masterpiece. It's not perfect, but it portrays vampires the way they were meant to be portrayed. They're not romantic. They do not sparkle. They don't want to seduce us. They are apex predators and we are their food. Danny Huston steals the show as the vampire leader Marlowe, and Josh Hartnett, Melissa George, and Manu Bennett all give strong performances as well. The editing could be better. I kind of agree and disagree. Um, I don't think it's awesome just because these are the opposite of Twilight vampires. I again think that we needed to see more suspense. 1 star. 30 Days of Night is a disappointing film. It is about an Alaskan town that is plunged into darkness for a month, and it is attacked by a bloodthirsty gang of vampires. Josh Hartnett and Melissa George give horrible jobs. The screenplay is badly written. David Slade did a terrible job directing this movie. I was not impressed with this motion picture. Well, the Prophet suggests that this reviewer is wrong. 1 star, certainly wrong. I would say that, you know, the thing about the bloodthirsty gang of vampires, we don't get a sense of just who they are. I mean, we know in a superficial sense that they've all come to this place in Alaska as sort of a vampire vacation to have like a bloody orgy of sorts, but it's kind of cardboard. That's a screenplay problem. 1 star, silly story, utter nonsense, nothing to see here. 4.5 stars, very bloody and gory, but very interesting and scary. 5 stars, one of my favorite vampire movies, intelligent script, unique location, and of course, Melissa George. 4.5 stars, one of my favorite vamp movies, period. 3.5 stars. The pacing is sporadic throughout the first act of the film, allowing no winding of tension, and the ending has some nonsensical moments, but 30 Days of Night is surprisingly a fun, bloody ride, once in the mindset of an action horror film, and thankfully tries to achieve nothing more than just that with a fine cast and an intriguing premise. Yeah, if you're just looking for over-the-top gore, to freak you out with gore, then you're going to get what you're looking for. 3 stars. Though 30 Days of Night suffers from plot holes and some ugly visuals, it still finds a way to be an entertaining bloodbath. 4 stars. Very intense vampire flick. These vamps don't seduce you. They rip you apart. I like the cast and premise of the movie. I enjoyed it a lot. 4.5 stars. I love vampire films, and this is one of the best. 3 stars. Pretty entertaining vampire tale. I found this to be entertaining. 4 stars. Any reasonable person would go into this film expecting guts, gore, and gobs of bad acting. You get the guts and the gore, but you also get some genuinely intense action, acting, and emotional agony. David Slade delivers. Hartnett does the usual brooding and continues to do it well. Yeah, I thought that Josh Hartnett wasn't off-putting, but the ending, although it was a cool idea, and I know it's faithful to the comics, it just didn't feel like it was satisfying. Um, I don't know. Again, I think it's because the tension was deflated out of it, and the mystery was deflated out of it before we got to the ending. But I'm not blaming Josh Hartnett. I'm kind of blaming whoever scripted the ending. It just wasn't enough. 3.5 stars. Loved, loved, loved these vampires. So different and scary. Wish you would take Robert McCammon's book, They Thirst, and make it into a movie. Again, this is a gore fan. There are people that will just rate this strictly on the gore. Yeah, it had gore, but it needed something else. It was like a gigantic, well-cooked Thanksgiving turkey that was just missing some kind of spice that you were expecting in the stuffing. There was just something not there. 3 stars. I enjoyed this movie for the most part. The best thing I liked about it was the look of the vampires. The story was decent. 2.5 stars, a great setup, but that unfortunately is all it has going for it. The film very quickly descends into typical horror slasher tropes. The characters are one-dimensional, and the action is muddled with odd camera work. Some of the odd camera work could have been because I did see a making of on this film, and it was pointed out that the director wanted to avoid the wire fu look of the Matrix and etc. He didn't like that, so he wanted to do setups where the vampires kind of leapt into the frame by use of trampolines and whatnot, and no wire work involved. And that kind of makes the camera work a little different than other movies of the time, and that might be what's going on here in this nitpick, and I call it a nitpick. 2.5 stars. I've read many Niles and Temples with comics, but not this one, and I really love their stories. They are very well written, and the art is very atmospheric, and with the slower pace and a bit of backstory about the vampires, this could have been one of the best horror movies of the past decade. I agree on that. The vampire gang just wasn't, thought out enough. I really wanted to like it, but it goes too soon into the vampire invasion, 15 or 20 minutes, and we don't have time to care about the characters and to be actually scared. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It threw everything out there. It threw down the gauntlet and gave us everything too soon. It peaked too soon. I agree. 3.5 stars. Solid action horror flick. Better than I think most have given it credit. Definitely plotting at times, but holds up better than you would think. 3.5 stars. From dusk till dawn of the 21st century, but it's not really the highest of praises. No, I disagree. This isn't even in the same genre of Dusk Till Dawn. That's action comedy. It's making fun of itself. It's making fun of vampire tropes. This is not even in the same genre. Totally irrelevant and unfair comparison. 3.5 stars. 73% saw this on 6/7/16. It uses its interesting premise to the maximum, but does not take anything much different than the cliche-ridden path of the genre. The ending lacks strength despite having a lot of potential. I agree there. The ending was a cool idea, but it didn't hit you. It didn't have that something. 4 stars. Great vampire movie and overall a great horror movie. 2 stars. Every blue moon my wife jokingly asks, "Hey, what about Alaska? Let's move there." My answer always the same. If they gotta pay you to live there, that shows it sucks. Perpetual daylight and 30-day long periods of night. And then there's this movie. If vampires were real and vampires were strategic, of course they'd attack it. 30 days of night. Beyond that, movie-wise, this was an okay movie, a fun time, if not a good movie. I agree with him. The premise is fantastic. It's an idea that would seem to be so obvious. Why hadn't someone thought of it before? But, sometimes the simple stuff it took a unique way of thinking, a unique mind to put the two things together. 1 star. Horrifically boring and generic as hell. It's horrendous horror film that lacks in every department. I completely disagree. 5 stars. This is actually a good scary movie despite the harsh critic reviews. I disagree that it's that scary. I think it's shocking in its gore. I don't think it has the suspension to actually make me scared. I don't recall being scared. 4 stars. Very scary and far from the predictable track. Totally opposite. It does become very predictable about halfway through. Very scary, no. Again, I disagree. 3.5 stars. While cliched at some points, this movie provides a lot more thrills, excitement, and drama other than horror movies that have been released in recent years. And the modern, up-to-date Bram Stoker's creation is a lot better and scarier than the glittery kind. Yeah, this is, that divide you see again. The Twilight type of vampires really rubbed so many people the wrong way that even in 2016 they were slamming Twilight. I don't disagree. I thought Twilight was ridiculous, not just for what they did with vampires, but just the writing itself, even in the original book, is atrocious. But enough on that. 3.5 stars. A terrifying tale of modern vampirism. Although I ain't into modern vampires too much, I enjoyed this movie. It's thrilling, upsetting, really gory. The acting is very good, and the isolated, dark atmosphere of the North just makes the flick chilling, and shares a few common points with zombie flicks. I kind of agree, but you know what it seems like to me is it gives me the vibe of The Thing, like John Carpenter's Thing. It gives me that vibe with the setting, the atmosphere, the light. You're always at night. Um, that wasn't used. It wasn't utilized like it could have been. It could have had more subtle jabs at John Carpenter's work, but it didn't go in that direction. But it gave me that vibe, that John Carpenter, you're in Antarctica vibe. 3.5 stars. Very interesting concept, but not executed the best. The character stories bored me and gave me no reason to feel attached to them. I was more interested in the vampires, which were done pretty well, I thought, but weren't enough to make this one of the greats. 4 stars. 30 Days of Night, in my honest opinion, or in my opinion, is one of the best modern vampire movies. I say modern, but the film's almost 10 years old. The vampires aren't overly angsty, just pure instinct-driven monsters. Yeah, I agree. The fans want to see the monster vampire, not the, I'm sexy and want to seduce you. 2.5 stars. Was looking good, but had some spoilers. 3 stars. I think if the movie was 15 or 20 minutes shorter, would have been a lot better. 3 stars. While at times it can be thrilling and scary, with acceptable acting, the movie as a whole is confusing and has disorientating camera work. However, the music is really good. 2 stars. An interesting concept is wrecked by an absurd third act and bland characters who we don't mind watching getting eaten. Yeah, I'll largely agree. We don't get enough character development. It feels too rushed. It's too compressed. 30 days are compressed into this, and you feel it's been compressed. 4.5 stars. As usual, critics overanalyzed, and it's actually a lot of fun. Josh Hartnett is still a potential star, in my opinion. 5 stars. This is a great movie, underrated and fantastic. My favorite movie in a while. Seriously, check it out. It's probably a fan of the gore. 3.5 stars. One of the better suspense movies, entertaining enough. Josh does a good job. How do they cast some of the ugly people? Not in, not in honor my idea. Well, vampires aren't supposed to be pretty. I think you're kind of wanting it to be like Twilight, or you're wanting sexy vampires. Vampires are supposed to be monsters in this, and the actors do a good job of showing you ugly people as vampires. That's part of it. 3 stars. Some very effective scare and gore scenes and some well-executed performances can't help the lack of a cohesive narrative. It's an interesting premise, though, and Danny Huston is quite effective as the leader of the pack of marauding vampires. Yeah, I'll kind of agree with that. I'll leave this one. I've had my say. I was trying to figure out why this movie was considered rotten, and I'm going to go with the thought that, you couldn't please everybody. Some people want vampires as monsters. Some want them as, super smart and seductive and sexy. And you're not going to please both of those with this. It was faithful to its source material, and it was a commercial success. So I would say, despite being rotten, it did what it set out to do. And I'm going to close this one and see you on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.